For Father's Day, my daughter sent me a beautifully wrapped box that made my heart swell with pride. But when my wife saw it, her voice was trembling. "Don't open it. Can't you see?" I looked closer at what she was pointing to, dark red stains seeping through the bottom of the box. There, in my daughter's handwriting, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. The morning had started so perfectly. Martha was humming while making my favorite pancakes, and I was sitting at our kitchen table, admiring the carefully wrapped package that the FedEx driver had delivered at exactly 8:30 a.m., unusually early for a Sunday morning delivery, but the driver had explained it was marked as Urgent Father's Day Delivery, Signature Required. The wrapping paper was expensive, the kind Sarah would have chosen back when she cared about making things special. Pink with silver ribbons, just like the gifts she used to wrap as a little girl when she'd spend hours making Father's Day cards with glitter and crayon hearts. The return address showed Sarah's name, but no return address, just "Special Delivery for Dad," written in her familiar handwriting. I reached for the box again, but Martha's hand shot out like lightning, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Her coffee cup trembled in her other hand, the dark liquid threatening to spill onto our worn wooden table. The same table where Sarah had done her homework 20 years ago, where she'd sit cross-legged, explaining her dreams of becoming a veterinarian because she loved animals so much. "James, please," Martha breathed. Her voice was trembling. "Don't open it. Can't you see? Look at the bottom. Really look." That's when I saw them. Dark crimson stains had seeped through the pristine wrapping paper, creating irregular patches that looked almost like blood. My hands began to shake as I turned the box over, and there it was, written in Sarah's familiar looping handwriting, 4 words that made my blood run cold. "You deserve this, Dad." The coffee in my stomach turned to ice. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I'd helped her practice her cursive letters for hours when she was 8, patiently guiding her small fingers as she formed each letter. But these 4 words carried a weight that made my chest tighten with dread. "You deserve this, Dad." Martha set her cup down so hard it cracked against the saucer. She'd been watching Sarah more carefully than I had these past few months, noting things I'd refused to see. The cold distance in our daughter's voice during her rare phone calls. The way she'd started talking about money with a hardness that reminded me of someone else entirely. I was wondering when this would arrive, I found myself saying, the words surprising even me. Martha's eyes widened, but before she could ask what I meant, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy. Hope you enjoy your gift. You taught me actions have consequences. Today you learn yours." The house suddenly felt too quiet, too still, like the air before a thunderstorm. Outside, our neighbor Mrs. Henderson was calling for her cat Mittens, who'd gone missing 3 days ago. Her voice carried through our open window, frail and worried, and I wondered why that detail felt so important, like a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Martha was staring at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. She knew about the difficult decision we'd made 2 months ago, but she didn't know everything. She didn't know about the real reason I'd cut off Sarah's monthly payments or the late-night phone calls where Sarah's voice had sounded strange and slurred. She didn't know about what I'd found in Sarah's apartment or why I'd been losing sleep ever since. The box sat between us like a ticking bomb, its cheerful exterior hiding something that my gut told me would change everything. The dark stains had spread slightly, and I could swear I smelled something metallic mixed with the scent of Martha's pancakes. That smell triggered a memory I'd been trying to suppress. The crime scenes I'd processed during my FBI years, the way death always announced itself through the senses before the mind could fully comprehend what it was witnessing. I stood up slowly and walked to our kitchen window, looking out at the street where children rode bicycles and neighbors tended their gardens on what should have been a peaceful Father's Day morning. 3 houses down, the Petersons were loading their car for what looked like a family picnic. 2 blocks over, I could see Mr. Davis washing his truck in his driveway while his golden retriever played in the sprinkler water. Normal families doing normal things, unaware that something dark had entered our quiet neighborhood. "James," Martha said softly, "you're scaring me. What did you mean when you said you were expecting this?" I turned back to face her, this woman who'd stood by me through 28 years of factory work, who'd never asked questions when I'd taken early retirement from a job she thought was just about production quotas and safety inspections. She deserved to know the truth, but some truths carried weights that could crush the people you loved most. "Do you remember when I told you about my nightmares?" I asked, settling back into my chair. "The ones that started about 6 weeks ago? The dreams where I kept seeing Sarah in danger, but every time I tried to help her, she ran further away?" Martha nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. She'd held me through those restless nights, whispering reassurances when I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced something terrible was coming, but unable to articulate what or why. "They weren't just nightmares," I continued. "They were my subconscious, trying to process patterns I was seeing, but didn't want to acknowledge. Sarah's phone calls that always came when you were at work. The way she'd ask specific questions about our daily routines, when we went grocery shopping, when we attended church, when we took our evening walks. Questions that seemed innocent from a daughter checking on her parents, but felt different when you added them all together." The text message alert on my phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. "TikTok, Daddy. Time's wasting. Open your present before it gets too warm outside." Martha's face went pale as she read the message over my shoulder. "James, this isn't normal. This isn't our Sarah. Something's very wrong with her." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I think it's been wrong for a lot longer than either of us wanted to admit." I picked up the box again, feeling its weight, heavier than it should be for its size, with a shifting quality that made my stomach turn. The bloodstains had darkened as they dried, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate, like some macabre artwork designed to maximize psychological impact. Whatever was inside had been carefully positioned, thoughtfully presented to create the maximum amount of horror and revulsion. Martha reached across the table and touched my hand, her skin cold despite the warm morning. "Whatever's in there, we'll face it together, just like we always have." Her words reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her 32 years ago, why I'd chosen a quiet life over the adrenaline of federal investigations, why protecting her had always been worth any sacrifice. But now that quiet life was about to be shattered by the very person we'd created it for. Martha's question hung in the air between us like smoke. "James, what do you mean you were expecting this?" Her voice carried the weight of 32 years of marriage, the kind of tone that meant she'd know if I was lying. But how could I explain what I'd discovered 2 months ago without destroying what little hope we still had for our daughter? I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when I'd driven to Sarah's apartment to surprise her with groceries. I'd been doing that more often lately, worried about how thin she'd gotten, how her voice sounded hollow during our weekly calls. I'd used my spare key to let myself in, expecting to find her sleeping or maybe watching TV. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. Whiskers, the orange tabby cat I'd given Sarah for her 26th birthday, was lying motionless on the kitchen floor. But it wasn't the sight of the dead cat that shattered my heart. It was the small plastic bag next to him, white powder spilled across Sarah's coffee table, and the burnt spoon that told me everything I needed to know about where my $2,000 a month had really been going. "She's been using drugs, Martha," I said quietly, watching my wife's face crumble with the weight of confirmation for fears she'd harbored but never voiced. "That's why I cut off the money, not because I was tired of supporting her, but because I was watching my little girl kill herself one payment at a time." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, but I continued before she could speak. "When I found Whiskers dead in her apartment, Sarah told me he'd run away. She looked me straight in the eye and lied, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that her cocaine habit had killed the one thing she was supposed to love and protect. But there was something else. Text messages on her phone from Derek, instructions about product delivery and payment schedules. Messages that made it clear he wasn't just her husband, he was her supplier. The morning sun streaming through our kitchen window seemed too bright for the darkness we were discussing. I remembered how Derek had insisted on managing Sarah's finances after their wedding, how he'd convinced her that her parents' monthly support was enabling dependence, even while he was the one creating that dependence with drugs. Derek's been dealing to her from the beginning, I continued, remembering the expensive watch he'd worn to their wedding, the luxury car he'd somehow afforded on his supposed retail job salary. I didn't want to believe it at first. He seemed so charming when they were dating, so concerned about Sarah's well-being. But when I saw those text messages, the way he talked about dosages and payment schedules, I realized he'd targeted her specifically because she had family money coming in every month. Martha stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. She walked to the window and stared out at Mrs. Henderson, who was still calling for mittens, her voice growing more desperate with each passing minute. 3 cats had gone missing in our neighborhood over the past 2 months, and the coincidence was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern I didn't want to recognize. "You should have told me," Martha said, her reflection in the window showing tears she was trying not to shed. "We could have handled this together. We always handled everything together." I wanted to go to her, to wrap my arms around the woman who'd stood by me through 28 years of factory work, who'd never complained when we had to choose between fixing the furnace and buying Sarah new school clothes. But the box on the table seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, demanding attention like a living thing. "I was trying to protect you," I said, knowing how inadequate it sounded. "And I was hoping, God help me, I was hoping that cutting off the money would force her to get help, that maybe hitting bottom would wake her up." Martha turned from the window, and I saw something in her expression that chilled me more than the bloodstains on the box. It was recognition. The look of someone putting together pieces of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously collecting for months. "The phone calls that hang up when I answer," she said slowly, "the way she only calls when you're at work. The strange questions about our daily routines, about when we're home and when we're not." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "She's been planning something, hasn't she?" Before I could answer, we heard a car door slam in our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Derek's black sedan, the expensive kind that drug money could buy. Sarah was getting out of the passenger side, but she moved differently now, with the predatory grace of someone who'd learned to hunt. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her clothes designer brands that cost more than Martha made in a week at the diner. "They're here," Martha whispered, instinctively moving closer to me. "James, whatever's in that box, whatever they want, we need to call the police." But I was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way I'd learned to do during my 30 years supervising production lines where a single mistake could cost lives. Sarah and Derek wouldn't have come here without a plan, and they wouldn't have sent the box without knowing exactly how we'd react. The text message had been too perfectly timed, the psychological pressure too calculated. Sarah knocked on our front door with the kind of confident rhythm that suggested she already considered this her house. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more, the same pattern she'd used as a child when she wanted something special, when she was about to ask for a favor or permission for a sleepover. Martha gripped my arm so tightly I could feel her fingernails through my shirt. "Don't open it," she whispered urgently. "Don't let them in. Not with that box sitting there like whatever evil thing it contains." But even as she spoke, we both knew I would open the door. Because despite everything, the lies, the drugs, the dead cat, the blood-stained box, she was still my daughter. Still the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during Saturday morning cartoons, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a spider because she didn't want to hurt any living creature. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and Derek's voice carried through the door with false cheerfulness. "Hey folks, we brought a special Father's Day surprise. Hope you're ready for some family bonding time." My hand trembled as I reached for the front door. Martha's grip on my arm tightened. Her wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd bought with overtime money 32 years ago, pressing into my skin like a lifeline to better times. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 silhouettes waiting with the patient stillness of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. The door opened to reveal Sarah standing on our welcome mat. The same mat she'd helped Martha pick out at Walmart 5 years ago, back when she still visited without ulterior motives. But the woman before me now bore only a surface resemblance to my daughter. Her smile was too wide, too practiced, like she'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. "Happy Father's Day, Daddy," Sarah's voice carried a sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. She stepped forward for a hug, and I caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something else, something metallic that reminded me of the stains on the box. "I hope you liked our special delivery. We put so much thought into it." Derek lingered behind her, his 6-foot frame filling our doorway like he owned it. His designer sunglasses reflected our kitchen behind me, and I noticed he was carrying a manila folder tucked under his arm. Everything about him screamed money, money that came from destroying lives like Sarah's, like the dozens of other young people he'd probably hooked with promises and lies. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Derek's voice was smooth as silk, but there was steel underneath. "We've been looking forward to this family reunion for months." Against every instinct screaming at me to slam the door, I stepped back and let them enter. Sarah brushed past me with the confident stride of someone who believed she held all the cards, her heels clicking against our hardwood floor with sharp, staccato beats that sounded like a countdown timer. Martha remained frozen by the kitchen table, one hand protectively positioned near the blood-stained box, as if she could somehow shield us from whatever horror it contained. Her face had gone pale as parchment, but her jaw was set with the stubborn determination I'd fallen in love with decades ago. "So," Sarah said, settling into her childhood chair like she'd never left home, "I see you haven't opened your present yet. That's not like you, Daddy. You always taught me that when someone gives you a gift, the polite thing to do is open it right away." The words hit me like physical blows. I had taught her that during countless Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations when our small house had been filled with laughter instead of this suffocating dread. Back when Sarah's biggest concern was whether Santa had eaten all the cookies we'd left out, not whether her next fix would kill her. Derek positioned himself by our front window, his gaze sweeping the street like a sentry checking for witnesses. The manila folder remained clutched in his hands, and I noticed his knuckles were white with tension despite his casual demeanor. Whatever plan they'd concocted, it required privacy and isolation. "Why don't you sit down, James?" Derek said, and the fact that he didn't call me Mr. Patterson felt like a deliberate insult. "Sarah and I have some things we need to discuss with you and Martha. Family business." I remained standing, my factory-trained instincts telling me to maintain mobility in case I needed to protect Martha. "If you want to talk, we can talk, but first, I want to know what's in that box." Sarah's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, Daddy, don't you want it to be a surprise? I worked so hard to make it special. Derek helped me pick out exactly the right components." She reached across the table and touched the box with one manicured finger, tracing the bloodstains like they were decorative patterns. The casual way she handled what I was increasingly certain contained something dead or dying made my stomach lurch with revulsion and grief. Martha found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sarah, honey, what's happened to you? This isn't who you are. This isn't who we raised." "Who you raised?" Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something feral and desperate underneath. "You raised a fool, Mother. A trusting little girl who believed that if she was good enough, sweet enough, grateful enough, her parents would support her forever. But life doesn't work that way, does it?" She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Life is about power, about taking what you need before someone else takes it from you. Derek taught me that." Derek smiled proudly, like a teacher whose student had just recited a particularly important lesson. "Sarah's learned that family loyalty is a transaction, just like everything else. You provide value, you receive value. Stop providing value." He shrugged eloquently. "And you get consequences," Sarah finished, her hand now resting possessively on the box. "Just like you taught me, Daddy. Remember when I was 12 and I lied about breaking Mrs. Henderson's garden gnome? You made me go over there and confess, made me work in her garden for a month to pay for a replacement." The memory felt like a punch to the gut. I did remember. It had been a lesson about accountability, about making things right when you'd done wrong. How had that childhood lesson become twisted into this nightmare sitting in my kitchen? "I learned that actions have consequences," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "And cutting off my money was an action, Daddy, a very deliberate, very hurtful action that showed me exactly how much your so-called unconditional love was worth. Martha stepped closer to me, and I could feel her shaking. Sarah, we didn't cut off your money to hurt you. We were trying to help you get clean, trying to save your life. Save my life? Sarah's voice rose to near hysteria. You destroyed my life. Do you have any idea what happens when you suddenly can't pay the people you owe money to? Do you know what Derek's associates do to people who can't meet their obligations? Derek's smile widened, and I realized with growing horror that this had all been orchestrated. The timing, the location, even Sarah's emotional breakdown. It was all theater designed to manipulate us into compliance. Which brings us to why we're here, Derek said, opening the manila folder with theatrical precision. We've prepared a little presentation for you folks. Sarah, why don't you show them what's in the box while I explain our new family arrangement? Sarah's hand hovered over the blood-stained wrapping paper, her fingers poised to tear it away. The morning sun streaming through our kitchen window seemed to dim, as if even nature understood that some revelations were too dark for daylight. Go ahead, Daddy, Sarah whispered, her voice suddenly small and broken in a way that reminded me painfully of the child she used to be. Open it. See what happens when you abandon your family. With hands that felt disconnected from my body, I reached for the blood-soaked wrapping paper. The expensive material tore easily, revealing a plain cardboard box underneath. The metallic smell grew stronger as I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made my knees buckle with shock and grief. A small orange tabby cat lay curled inside the box, its white paws stained with dried blood. But this wasn't Whiskers. I could tell immediately from the size and markings. This cat was smaller, with distinctive white mittens on all four paws that I recognized with dawning horror. Mrs. Henderson's missing cat, Mittens. The beloved pet that our elderly neighbor had been searching for desperately, calling his name every morning and evening for the past 3 days. Surprised, Daddy? Sarah's voice carried a note of twisted pride. I remembered how much you loved that story about teaching me consequences. Well, Mrs. Henderson's cat learned about consequences too, just like all the others will until you start being reasonable. Martha's gasp of horror seemed to echo in our suddenly too small kitchen. She stumbled backward until she hit the counter, her hand pressed to her mouth as if she could somehow unsee what lay before us. The innocent creature that had spent countless afternoons purring on Mrs. Henderson's porch was now a grotesque message delivered in a Father's Day box. Derek stepped forward, his manila folder now open to reveal photographs and documents arranged with meticulous care. This is what we like to call evidence, folks. See, Sarah here has been having quite the productive few months since you cut off her allowance. He spread the photos across our kitchen table like a dealer showing cards. Each image showed a different pet, cats, small dogs, even a rabbit, in various states of distress. My factory-trained mind tried to process what I was seeing, but the implications were too monstrous to fully comprehend. 6 neighborhood pets over the past 2 months, Derek continued conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather, all of them killed in ways that would suggest a disturbed individual with intimate knowledge of their daily routines. Someone who maybe had access to their homes, their schedules. Someone the neighbors trusted. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me photos of herself with various neighbors, helping them look for their missing pets. In one image, she was consoling Mrs. Henderson, offering to help distribute flyers. In another, she was hugging Peterson's 8-year-old daughter, who was crying over their missing puppy. The beauty of it, Sarah said, scrolling through the photos with casual indifference, is that everyone sees me as the helpful neighbor girl, sweet Sarah Patterson, who always volunteers to pet sit when people go out of town, who knows exactly when they leave for work, when they'll be gone overnight, when their precious animals are most vulnerable. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Every missing pet report, every tearful neighbor, every community Facebook post about beloved animals vanishing without a trace. Sarah had orchestrated all of it. She'd used her access and their trust to steal and murder innocent creatures for the sole purpose of framing me. Derek's smile grew wider as he watched understanding dawn in my eyes. Here's the thing, James. We've been very careful to establish a pattern. All the murders happened on days when you were seen in the neighborhood. Your morning walks, your trips to the grocery store, even your volunteer work at the community center. We documented everything. He pulled out a timeline chart that looked like something from a police investigation. Dates, times, locations, all corresponding to my daily routines and the disappearances of neighborhood pets. The thoroughness of their planning was as impressive as it was terrifying. We have witnesses who saw you acting strangely around the same time pets went missing, Sarah added, her voice taking on a mocking sing-song quality. People who remember you asking weird questions about their animals or lingering too long near their yards. Martha found her voice through her shock and horror. You've been planning this for months. While we were worried about your health, your addiction, you were planning to destroy your own father. Planning to save my life, Sarah corrected sharply. Derek's associates don't accept excuses, Mother. They don't care that my parents decided to abandon me when I needed them most. They only care about payment, and they expect it whether I have family support or not. Derek walked to our front window and peered out at the street with calculated casualness. Speaking of payment, we should probably discuss our new arrangement. See, James, you now have two choices. Choice 1, resume Sarah's monthly support at $3,000 instead of $2,000, plus a $5,000 makeup payment for the 2 months you've been delinquent. He paused for effect, letting the financial demand sink in. $3,000 a month would drain our retirement savings within a year, force Martha to keep working at the diner well into her 70s, maybe cost us the house we'd spent decades paying off. Choice 2, Derek continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting, is that we take all this evidence to the police. Your fingerprints are on half the murder weapons. We made sure of that by using tools from your garage while you were at church last Sunday. The violation felt personal and complete. They'd been in our home, touching our belongings, planning our destruction, while we sat in wooden pews praying for our daughter's recovery. Every moment of hope we'd held on to had been weaponized against us. Sarah stood up and walked to where Mrs. Henderson's collar hung on a hook by our back door, the same collar Martha had been keeping safe, hoping to return it when Mittens came home. Sarah lifted it with theatrical reverence, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "Poor Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. 83 years old and all alone except for her precious Mittens. Do you know what she said when I helped her make missing cat posters yesterday? She said that cat was the only family she had left. The cruelty was breathtaking. Not only had Sarah murdered an innocent animal, she tortured its elderly owner with false hope, made herself appear sympathetic, while orchestrating the very crime that was destroying an old woman's heart. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a timer counting down. "You have exactly 30 minutes to decide, James. Transfer the money electronically, or we drive to the police station and present our evidence of your disturbing animal killing spree." Martha stepped forward, her small frame shaking with rage I'd rarely seen in our decades together. "You're monsters, both of you. How did we raise someone capable of this?" "You raised someone who learned to survive," Sarah shot back, her mask of fake sweetness finally slipping completely. "You raised someone who discovered that love is conditional, that family support comes with strings, that when things get difficult, even parents will cut you loose to save themselves." She began pacing our small kitchen like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking against the floor in an aggressive rhythm. "Do you know what it's like to wake up every day knowing that the people who claim to love you most in the world would rather watch you suffer than inconvenience themselves? Do you know what Derek's friends do to people who can't pay their debts?" Derek's phone timer now showed 28 minutes remaining. Through our kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Henderson sitting on her porch, probably still hoping her beloved companion would wander home. In a few hours, one of us would have to tell her that Mittens was dead, that her trust and kindness had been betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. 28 minutes, folks," Derek announced cheerfully. "I'd suggest you start making some phone calls to your bank. Sarah's already scouted out Mrs. Henderson's new puppy, the little Pomeranian her granddaughter bought her yesterday to help with the grief. It would be such a shame if something happened to that one, too." Sarah's laugh was pure malice. "Especially since the old lady's heart is already weak. I'm not sure she could survive losing another pet so soon after mittens. But then again, that's not really our problem, is it, Daddy? The timer ticked down to 27 minutes, and I realized with crystalline clarity that my daughter had become someone I no longer recognized, someone capable of terrorizing elderly women and murdering innocent animals without a trace of remorse. Someone who saw love as weakness and family as a resource to be exploited. But as I watched her pace and heard Derek's confident threats, I also realized something else, something they didn't know, couldn't have anticipated in all their careful planning and psychological manipulation. I'd been expecting this visit for weeks. The timer on Derek's phone showed 25 minutes when I calmly unbuttoned my shirt and revealed the small recording device taped to my chest. The confident smirks on both their faces evaporated instantly, replaced by expressions of shock and growing panic. "You see, Sarah," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "you weren't the only one who learned about consequences and preparation. The difference is, I learned those lessons from 30 years of supervising factory operations where one mistake could kill people, not from torturing innocent animals." Martha's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She'd known something was different about me these past few weeks. The way I'd been taking longer walks, the mysterious phone calls, the small recording device I'd claimed was for dictating grocery lists. Now she realized I'd been documenting everything, building a case with the same methodical precision I'd once used to troubleshoot production line problems. Derek lunged forward, but stopped short when I held up my phone and showed him the screen. "FBI Animal Cruelty Task Force," I read aloud. "Speed dial number 1. I've been working with Agent Rebecca Martinez for 6 weeks now, ever since the third neighborhood pet disappeared and I started putting together the pattern you two were so proud of creating." Sarah's face had gone white as paper, but her voice still carried traces of defiance. "You're bluffing. You're just a retired factory worker. You don't know any FBI agents." I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "You're right about one thing. I am retired. But what you don't know is what I did before the factory job. 22 years with the Bureau, specializing in cases where animal cruelty escalates to violence against humans. I took early retirement after your mother and I got married, wanted a quieter life, a normal job that wouldn't put my family at risk." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Derek's manila folder slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, scattering his carefully arranged evidence across our kitchen floor. Sarah sank into her childhood chair as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "Every conversation we've had in the past 2 months has been recorded," I continued, reaching into my pocket to produce a second device. "Every threat, every admission, every detail about your systematic torture and murder of neighborhood pets. Agent Martinez has been listening to live feeds for the past 30 minutes. Martha found her voice, and it carried a mixture of awe and relief. "The late-night phone calls. The way you've been so calm despite everything happening. You knew they were coming." "I knew Sarah was escalating," I confirmed, keeping my eyes locked on my daughter's increasingly panicked expression. The pattern was too methodical, too targeted. Someone with intimate knowledge of the neighborhood, access to people's homes, and a specific grudge against me. It didn't take FBI training to narrow down the suspect list. Derek's timer still showed 23 minutes, but now it felt like a countdown to their doom rather than mine. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, probably trying to delete evidence or contact associates, but I held up my own device again. "I wouldn't bother calling for help," I said conversationally. "Agent Martinez's team has been monitoring your communications for weeks. They know about your drug operation, your associates, and the international network you've been selling torture videos to." Sarah's gasp was audible across the kitchen. "What torture videos?" Derek's face crumbled as he realized his secret had been exposed. The FBI surveillance had caught something even Sarah didn't know about, her husband's side business of filming her animal murders and selling them to online networks that specialized in extreme content. "Oh yes," I said, watching Sarah's horror as the full scope of her husband's betrayal became clear. "Derek here has been monetizing your activities. High-definition videos of you torturing and killing pets, sold to subscribers who pay premium prices for that kind of content. You thought you were doing this to save your life, but Derek was building a business around your trauma and desperation. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Sarah turned on Derek with fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of our small house. "You filmed me? You sold videos of me killing those animals?" Derek tried to back toward the door, but there was nowhere to run. "Sarah, baby, listen to me. It was just business. We needed the money, and those people pay thousands for authentic content." Sarah's scream of rage cut him off. She launched herself at him with claws extended, and for a moment our kitchen became a whirlwind of violence as she attacked the man who'd manipulated her addiction, orchestrated her crimes, and then profited from her psychological breakdown. I let them fight for exactly 15 seconds before speaking again, my voice cutting through their struggle with the authority I'd once used to manage crisis situations in federal investigations. "That's enough." The command in my tone made them both freeze. "Sarah, step away from Derek. Both of you. Sit down and keep your hands visible." They complied with the automatic obedience that comes from recognizing genuine authority. Derek's expensive sunglasses were broken, hanging askew from one ear, and Sarah's perfect hair was disheveled, her designer clothes torn at the shoulder. "The recording devices have captured everything," I said, settling back into my own chair with the calm demeanor of someone who'd regained complete control of the situation. "Your confessions to serial animal murder, Derek's admission of selling torture videos, your threats against Mrs. Henderson's new puppy, and your detailed plans to frame me for crimes you committed." Martha moved to stand beside me, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. For the first time in weeks, I could see hope replacing fear in her expression. "How long before Agent Martinez arrives?" I checked my phone as if consulting a schedule, though I already knew the answer. "Her team has been positioned around the neighborhood since 7 this morning. They should be at our front door in approximately 3 minutes. Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. "Daddy, please, I'm your daughter. I know I made mistakes, but Derek made me do it. He said you and Mom had abandoned me, that I had to protect myself. I was scared and sick, and I didn't know what else to do." The plea in her voice almost broke my heart. For just a moment, I could see traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms frightened her, who trusted me to make everything better when her world felt scary and uncertain. But then I remembered Mrs. Henderson's tears, the methodical cruelty of the photographs Derek had shown me, and the complete lack of remorse Sarah had displayed while describing her crimes. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. "I love you, Sarah," I said quietly. "I always have, and I always will. But love doesn't mean enabling destruction. Love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences hurt everyone involved." Derek made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You don't understand what you're doing, old man. My associates won't just disappear because you called the FBI. They'll come looking for their investment, and when they do—" He never finished the threat. The sound of multiple car doors slamming outside our house announced the arrival of Agent Martinez's tactical team. Through our front window I could see black SUVs and unmarked sedans surrounding our property with military precision. The timer on Derek's phone showed 18 minutes remaining, but time had become irrelevant. The carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation they'd spent months building was about to collapse under the weight of federal law enforcement and forensic evidence. Sarah looked at me with the desperate expression of someone watching their entire world dissolve. "What happens now, Daddy?" Before I could answer, Agent Martinez's voice called through our front door with crisp professional authority. "FBI, we have a warrant for the arrest of Sarah Patterson and Derek Williams on charges of animal cruelty, extortion, and interstate commerce violations. Open the door immediately." I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and calm, and walked toward the front door to let justice finally enter our home. Agent Martinez entered our kitchen with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of human cruelty and learned not to be surprised by any of it. She was younger than I'd expected when we first spoke on the phone 6 weeks ago, but her eyes carried the weight of experience that comes from investigating the kinds of cases that most people couldn't stomach. "Mr. Patterson," she nodded to me with professional respect, then turned her attention to Sarah and Derek, who sat frozen in their chairs like children caught in an act they couldn't explain away. "Ms. Patterson, Mr. Williams, you're under arrest for violation of federal animal cruelty statutes, interstate commerce in violent content, extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Two tactical officers flanked them as Agent Martinez read their Miranda rights in a voice that carried across our small kitchen with crystal clarity. Sarah began crying, not the manipulative tears she'd used to control situations throughout her childhood, but the broken sobs of someone finally understanding that actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away. Derek tried one last desperate gambit. Agent Martinez, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm willing to cooperate fully with your investigation. I have information about larger networks, international connections that could be valuable to the Bureau. Agent Martinez's expression didn't change. Mr. Williams, you'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss cooperation with federal prosecutors. Right now, my concern is executing these arrest warrants and securing evidence from this crime scene. As they led Sarah toward our front door in handcuffs, she turned back to look at me with eyes that held a mixture of hatred, betrayal, and something that might have been the last flicker of the child she used to be. I'll never forgive you for this, Daddy. The words should have broken my heart, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. You don't have to forgive me, Sarah. You just have to live with the choices you made. Maybe someday, when you're clean and thinking clearly, you'll understand that everything I did was because I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself and innocent people. Martha squeezed my hand as we watched our daughter disappear into the back of a federal vehicle. 32 years of marriage had taught us to communicate without words, and what passed between us in that moment was understanding, grief, and relief, all tangled together in a way that only couples who'd weathered real storms could comprehend. Agent Martinez approached us as the tactical team finished securing evidence from our kitchen. Mr. Patterson, I want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your information and recordings were instrumental in building a case that will likely prevent these crimes from escalating to violence against humans. She paused, studying the box that still sat on our kitchen table with its grisly contents. We've seen this pattern before. Animal cruelty that becomes increasingly systematic and organized almost always precedes violence against people. Your daughter and her husband were on a trajectory that would have ended badly for more than just neighborhood pets. The validation felt important, even though I'd already known Sarah was escalating towards something worse. The methodical nature of her planning, the complete lack of empathy she'd displayed, the way she'd weaponized trust and kindness, these weren't the actions of someone who would stop with animals. What happens now? Martha asked, her voice steady despite everything we'd been through. Federal prosecution, Agent Martinez replied. With the evidence we've gathered, the recorded confessions, the video content Derek was selling, the pattern of systematic animal abuse, they're looking at significant prison time. Sarah could face 8 to 12 years, Derek possibly 15 to 20 due to his role in organizing and profiting from the crimes. The numbers felt abstract, but the reality behind them was clear. Sarah would be in prison for most of her 30s, maybe into her 40s. The young woman who'd once dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because she loved animals so much would spend the best years of her life behind bars for torturing and killing them. As Agent Martinez's team finished their work and departed, Martha and I found ourselves alone in our kitchen for the first time in what felt like years. The blood-stained box had been removed as evidence, but the emotional residue of the morning's events lingered like smoke. I need to tell Mrs. Henderson about Mittens, I said finally. The elderly woman deserved to know what had happened to her beloved companion, deserved to understand that her trust hadn't been misplaced. It had been exploited by someone she'd tried to help. Martha nodded, understanding without explanation that this was something I needed to do alone. The walk to Mrs. Henderson's house felt longer than the actual 3 blocks between our properties, weighted down by the knowledge of how much pain I was about to cause. Mrs. Henderson answered her door with the hopeful expression of someone who still believed good news might be possible. When she saw my face, that hope died instantly, replaced by the quiet resignation of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the difference between visits that brought joy and visits that brought closure. "It was Sarah, wasn't it?" she said before I could speak. I kept thinking there was something strange about how helpful she was with the missing cat posters, how she seemed to know exactly where to look and when to stop looking. I told her everything, about Sarah's addiction, about the frame-up scheme, about Derek's video business and the federal investigation. Mrs. Henderson listened without interruption, her 83-year-old hands folded in her lap with the patience of someone who'd survived enough tragedy to know that some stories need to be heard completely before they can be processed. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and patted my hand with the gentle touch of someone offering comfort despite her own grief. "You did the right thing, James. It couldn't have been easy, turning in your own daughter, but some things are more important than family loyalty." 6 months later, I received a letter from Sarah in federal prison. It was short, written on standard prison stationery and handwriting that looked smaller and more uncertain than I remembered. She told me she was clean for the first time in 3 years, that she was attending counseling sessions and thinking about the things she'd done. She didn't apologize, not exactly, but she said she was starting to understand why I'd made the choices I'd made. Martha and I had moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood by then, closer to her sister and farther from the memories that haunted our old kitchen. We'd used some of our savings to establish a fund for neighborhood pet owners who couldn't afford veterinary bills, a small way of honoring the innocent animals Sarah had killed. On Father's Day that year, no packages arrived at our door. Instead, Martha made pancakes and we sat on our new porch, watching birds at the feeder she'd hung from our oak tree. It wasn't the Father's Day I'd imagined when Sarah was small and full of dreams about healing animals instead of hurting them. But it was peaceful in a way that felt hard-earned and precious. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means allowing people to face consequences that will teach them lessons you couldn't. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance to find their way back to who they were meant to be, even if that journey leads them through places you can't follow. Derek received 22 years in federal prison. Sarah was sentenced to 10 years with possibility of parole in 7 for good behavior and completion of addiction treatment programs. Agent Martinez told me that their case had helped break up an international network of people who traded in violent content, potentially saving hundreds of animals and preventing crimes against humans that might never have been reported. I keep Sarah's letters in a box in my desk drawer, reading them sometimes when I need to remember that redemption is possible even after terrible choices. Martha planted a garden in our backyard where she grows vegetables for the local food pantry, and Mrs. Henderson visits us every few weeks, usually bringing her new rescue cat, a calico she named Hope. The past can't be changed, but the future remains unwritten. That's the lesson I learned during my strangest Father's Day. Not from my daughter's cruelty, but from the quiet strength it took to choose justice over enabling, truth over comfortable lies, and love tough enough to let someone fall far enough to finally find solid ground. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts about family, loyalty, and difficult choices in the comments below. To listen to our next story about the complex relationships that shape our lives, click on the suggested video. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that ultimately lead to healing.